Now, demand from tenants is far outstripping the number of available rental properties, causing a rise in the cost of renting. Zoopla data shows that rents have risen by 12.7% in Edinburgh and 13% in Dundee in the past year. The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors says the trend is striking in its consistency and increases are predicted to continue across the UK in the coming year. Well, I'm joined now by John Blackwood, who's Chief Executive of the Scottish Association of Landlords, and by Alison Watson, Director of Shelter Scotland. Good afternoon to both of you, and thank you for coming on. Alison, I'll start with you. How difficult is it for people to find affordable accommodation right now?
I think what we're seeing is a growth in demand for private lets, but in large part that is driven by decades of underinvestment in social houses, and that's what we're really concerned about at Shelter Scotland. I think the extent of homelessness, having reached a record high, takes us to a place where it's really a public response that we need to see to a profound housing emergency. Rents have reached levels that many people simply can't afford. We're taking calls every day at Shelter Scotland from people who are losing that battle to keep up with their rental costs, and the housing system is creaking as a result of that. And we really need to see an urgent intervention in the housing market to drive up the supply of affordable homes and specifically drive up the supply of social homes.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? There are so many factors going on here. You've got the cost of living crisis, plus if you have rents, particularly in the bigger cities, going up by around 13% in a year, that's an awful lot for people to take.
I think that is very much the case, and I think that's reflected in the very worrying situation that we're seeing on child poverty. We know that high housing costs are a huge driver of child poverty in Scotland. 21% of children in Scotland are living in poverty simply because of housing costs. So if we want to see a fix to child poverty, we really need to see a fix to the housing market. We need to see that injection urgently of additional social homes. That means that in a long-term sense, people can afford their rents, they have that security that they can keep that roof over their head.
And John Blackwood, from, I suppose, the other side of the argument in a way, how are things for landlords at the moment?
Well, I think landlords are struggling at the moment in a very similar way to how tenants are experiencing the marketplace. You know, to echo what Alison's been saying there, we have to look at what is the real problem here. Increases in rents is a symptom of a bigger problem, and that is the lack of investment in social housing, affordable housing, which is what the government needs to focus on.
So if everybody's then turning, or a lot of people, to the private rental sector, is that not good news for landlords?
Well, it's not, because it's the pressure that's been put on the sector. We're expecting the private rented sector to house everyone, and quite frankly, it can't do it. And many people would be more appropriately housed in social housing and in accommodation provided by our councils and our housing associations. So the private rented sector's got an important part to play, but it isn't the be-all and end-all. And sadly, at the moment, if you're looking for a house to rent, you have to go to the private rented sector, and it just simply cannot provide the accommodation.
Yeah, we're hearing earlier in the programme from a property agent, you know, hundreds and hundreds of applications for each property. And also the other side of that is that landlords weren't able to get rid of tenants who are not paying rent, and they're running into trouble. I mean, how much of that do you see?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that, and quite frankly, what it is as a result of the Scottish Government really putting off private landlords from investing in Scotland. And those who are private landlords operating, quite frankly, are hurrying to the door to sell the properties and get out the sector, which is going to make it harder for tenants to find accommodation in the future. Alison,
do you think there's an element of truth in that well-intentioned legislation to protect tenants might actually be causing a bigger problem long-term as landlords can't survive in the sector?
Yes, I think that's it. And I think it's... Sorry, my apologies.
No, we'll come to you in a sec. Yeah, Alison, on you go.
I mean, I think just to take your point there, I mean, I think rent caps are welcomed as a temporary measure to try and make things more manageable for people. But at the end of the day, rent caps are a reaction to a broken housing market, and we need that large-scale intervention in the market to drive up the supply of social homes. This is not a situation that's going to fix itself. And as John's saying, there is only so much that we can expect private landlords to do. They have a contribution to make. But the scale of demand that we're seeing, that the extent of homelessness requires a much bigger fix, and that has to be a bit more social homes.
Yeah, and John, tell us more then about, the caps and rents and also the eviction situation.
Yeah, well, certainly it's the pressure that the Scottish Government has placed on private landlords, which has just made them think, do you know what, I've had enough. I need to get out the sector. It's no longer affordable for them to continue to let their properties. And quite frankly, they feel that the government just wants to get rid of them. So there's only so much that certain people in the business sector will take before they will sell up and just, quite frankly, leave. And they're voting with their feet at the moment. That's what's happening. And what we really need the government to do is sit down with all parties in the sector and find a solution. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, but we've been talking about rents increasing for years now, lack of accommodation in Scotland for years now, and the government's not doing anything about it.
So are you saying that the government won't sit down and talk to you?
No, they have been, and it seems to be, and I'm sure Alison will concur, we sit in these meetings and we go round and round in circles, but we're not really coming up with a sustainable plan for the future to provide the housing that we need to house people in Scotland, and that's what we need to be focusing on.
OK, and Alison, let me just read you a bit of, we've got a Scottish Government statement. It says Scotland has led the way in delivering affordable housing across the UK with more than 118,000 homes delivered since 2007. They're committed to delivering on the target of 110,000 affordable homes by 2032, of which at least 70% will be available for social rent and 10% in remote, rural and island communities. That's just part of quite a lengthy statement, actually. Alison, what's your response to that?
I mean, we welcome these commitments, but commitments need to be turned into delivery. And I think just looking at the Scottish Government's latest statistics, the approvals for the number of new social homes has decreased by 13%. It's the lowest level that it's ever been in the last decade. And I think we need to see promises turned into delivery of actual homes. I think there's a sense here of, in a situation where on average every 18 minutes another household becomes homeless, we need to see the Scottish Government going faster and further on these commitments. And I think these commitments are great, 77,000 social homes by 2032, but we need to bear in mind over 500,000 social homes were lost in Scotland under right to buy. So this is a case of when good is, when great isn't good enough. And we really need to recognise the urgency of the situation and go faster and further in making sure that social homes are there so that we're stemming the flow of rising homelessness.
OK, Alison Watson from Shelter Scotland and John Blackwood from the Scottish Association of Landlords. Thank you both very much.